This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglan.
Anybody who loves the outdoors is well aware of what can happen. Bee stings, snake bites, mosquito bites, poison ivy, and that's just for starters. We go inside outdoors today with our state wildlife veterinarian for tips on how to avoid and how to treat. Our show first aired last September, but it is good stuff to remember for spring. Also, we'll get updates on diseases threatening the wildlife here in Kentucky. The doctor will see you now, next on Kentucky Afield Radio.
Hunting elk in Kentucky is a dream come true for many, and I want to add my name to that list.
And I want to add mine.
If you want to add yours,
the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife website is Elk Central. The Pick 4 option lets you put your name in the hat for cow, bull, archery, or firearm.
Plus youth tags.
The deadline is midnight, April 30th.
This could be my year.
And it could be yours.
Register for incredible Kentucky elk hunting at fw.ky.gov.
Kentucky's Nature and Wildlife Fund. You see it as a contribution option when you prepare your state tax return. But you also see it as songbirds and wildflowers. You can see it in clear flowing streams. Sometimes it's so secluded you may never see it at all. But if you only see it on your PC as you prepare your taxes, that's good too. Google it and see the difference this fund makes. Kentucky's Nature and Wildlife Fund, the natural tax shelter.
Welcome to Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. So, how you doing today? Take that literally. How is your health? How are you feeling? Is there pep in your step? Good color in your skin? We place a premium on our health. We've heard it said before that health is the great equalizer. You could have $1 million and stricken with disease, or poor, but in good health. Which would you pick? We take good health for granted, but what about the health of wildlife, wild animals? Just because you don't hear about it doesn't mean it's not a problem, and today you're going to hear about it. Wildlife in Kentucky is generally in good health, but in too many cases it does deserve a get well card. Today we're going to take a look at big disease that affects the smallest amphibians, that affects deer, that affects people. After all, we're all in this great world together. My guest today is wildlife veterinarian Dr. Iga Stasiak, and welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
We hear of things about wildlife and disease in the news. Start first talking about Zika.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So Zika virus is really big in the news right now, and it's a really big public health concern globally, particularly in South Central America, in Brazil. You've heard about it in the news.
Yeah, I heard like 14,000 cases now.
It's a big concern for travelers, traveling to those countries, particularly pregnant women. So, they're highly susceptible and does cause birth deformities and other complications. We've definitely been working really closely with the public health department here, mainly to raise awareness about Zika virus and ways that the public can protect themselves, and just some simple things you can do so that you can still go out and enjoy the outdoors and all the recreational opportunities we have here in Kentucky. Things like wearing mosquito repellent, long sleeves, long pants.
I see you're wearing long sleeves this morning. Is that an indication that you're worried about Zika?
No,
Sunburn?
I think that's more of a laundry issue.
Okay.
But
Zika, you're a wildlife veterinarian. Is this more of a concern for a vet, or is it more concern for someone, say, in family practice, a medical doctor?
So as a veterinarian, I deal with all kinds of different disease issues, and a lot of them have that intersection between public health, wildlife, animal health. They're all interconnected. And so when we talk about Zika virus, we talk about a disease that's transmitted by mosquitoes, which are, of course, animals. So we've got, wildlife vector. And a lot of mosquito-borne diseases, not particularly Zika virus, are also transmissible to animals as well. And so we work closely with the public health sector, the Department of Agriculture. And so it is a public health issue. Zika virus isn't impacting our native wildlife. But because we're dealing with mosquitoes, we are involved in that aspect of it.
This reminds me of a story I heard some years ago about the Africanized killer bee. And they said, well, it's in, South America. Let's just say Brazil, that part of the world. But it's making its way north. And if it's hot,
Yes.
say Arizona, you could have the Africanized killer bee there. But Kentucky would be too far north for it to thrive. Is the Zika virus anything close to that? Do they follow that same pattern?
Yes. So the mosquito vectors that carry Zika virus, they're invasive mosquito species that were introduced from tropical regions of the world, so Africa and Asia. And these mosquitoes are expanding their range, as are a number of tick and mosquito vectors. And that is closely related or linked to climate change and changing weather patterns. A lot of these mosquitoes or insects are able to overwinter, whereas in the past they wouldn't have been able to overwinter in these climates. So yes, that is a big concern for us, for myself as a wildlife veterinarian, and that is the expansion of these vector-borne diseases and vectors moving northward. We're also seeing expansion of hosts, so wildlife also expanding their range into northern parts, of Canada, species that we don't normally find in those areas as well. So we're seeing movement of pathogens with their hosts, movement of pathogens with their vectors, and so we'll probably be busy for the next foreseeable future trying to work with these diseases.
I remember a disease that was wildlife related called bird flu.
Yes.
And it seemed to have fallen out of the headlines. Do you follow that, being a veterinarian?
I have.
Is it still an issue?
It still is, and I've been following it very closely. In fact, last year we had a very large outbreak of bird flu or avian influenza in the poultry industry. There was a lot of work done trying to determine what role wild birds played. The virus is believed to have come over from Southeast Asia and was first found in the Pacific Northwest. Later last spring it showed up in Minnesota and affected the poultry industry there. A lot of concerns, mostly related to biosecurity, how this virus can move from one facility to another, oftentimes on clothing, equipment. It can also be airborne. So that's a concern mainly for the agricultural industry. Our wild birds mainly are resistant to it, and they also seem to carry these low pathogenic viruses, which are just like the equivalent of a seasonal flu in humans. So just like we have the flu, birds have the flu. And so it's not unusual, of course, to find flu viruses in birds. But what's going on in Southeast Asia is now we have this evolution of the flu virus because of the close interconnectedness, especially some of these markets in China where there's a lot of birds and waterfowl commingling. So these viruses, they're able to mutate and transfer back to waterfowl. And so, yes, so there's this incursion of these new viruses, which hopefully so far we haven't found them to persist in wild bird populations. So that's a good thing. Our wild birds are generally healthy, and they do tend to carry these low pathogenic viruses as opposed to these high pathogenic viruses that do cause die-offs in poultry.
If you're hiking down a trail or riding your bike down the street and you look out at the woods and say, the world is great, but if you're a scientist like you, is there an inclination to say, oh man, we're doomed?
I think there's a great inclination, and I think as scientists we really need to stay away from that, and conservationists, because there's always hope. I was reading an article recently, and that's exactly what it talked about. As conservationists, we see all the negative things happening in the world, the decline in species, so many endangered and threatened species, and all this, disease emergence. But we need to stay positive. There's also a lot of feel-good stories, species that are being brought back from the brink of extinction, and there's still a lot of great wildlife wilderness out there.
Nonetheless, as a wildlife veterinarian, there are diseases out there. And we'll talk about some specific ones with salamanders and maybe white nose with bats and tick-borne diseases. But let's just say you go out into the backyard. This could affect anybody. You don't have to be a sportsman, a sportswoman. You go out into the backyard, and if you were a mother, you would say, oh, no, put on shoes, you'll step on a bee. Get out of those weeds, you'll get poison ivy, poison oak, sumac, might get a snake bite. There's all these plethora of diseases out there, and illnesses and bites and stings that can happen to anybody, especially kids.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about any of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I would say that, I would definitely encourage everyone to go out and enjoy the outdoors, and I wouldn't let any of those things deter me from enjoying the outdoors. Oftentimes, the media sensationalize the concerns, and there's simple things you can do to try to avoid disease exposure or poison ivy exposure, whatever it is that you're concerned about. But generally, the benefits far outweigh any negative repercussions of being out there.
So to avoid a bee sting, I guess put on shoes, although a bee could strike you anywhere. I remember when I was a little boy and I'd play in the backyard, we had clover out there, and the bees would be on the clover, and buddy, about every 3 weeks or so, I was stepping on a bee, and I would scream bloody murder.
It happens.
It seemed like baking soda really saved the day very often. We are talking this hour with wildlife veterinarian for the state of Kentucky, Dr. Iga Stasiak. More after the break. You are listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan, and the Kentucky State Wildlife Veterinarian is in the studio with me this hour. Her name is Dr. Iga Stasiak. And one thing that I guess should go without saying, Doctor, is don't approach wildlife. Squirrels, rabbits, whatever it is, not a good idea.
When you're out there, if you see any animals that are diseased or sick or dead, just don't approach them. It's generally best to avoid them. We have some species here in Kentucky, skunks and bats predominantly, that carry rabies. And there are other diseases you can potentially contract from wildlife. If you see an animal that's sick, best leave it alone. Contact the Wildlife Management Agency. That's taking some good steps and keeping your pets vaccinated, some simple things you can do to avoid exposure to some of these common viruses and infections that we see.
I was talking to a fellow friend of mine who's in the Boy Scouts. I said, what do you tell your troop? And he said, one thing, don't approach any wildlife at all, and make sure you keep food out of your tent. And if you're camping, and my wife and I were camping last weekend, and I didn't have food in the tent, but I left some outside. He said, these animals can come in. While they may not bother you directly, they may leave disease germs behind. True?
Yes, absolutely. But I think more of the concern is animals becoming habituated to humans. And so that's a really good point about leaving the food out. We actually get quite a few calls. I get a lot of calls from members of the public regarding nuisance wildlife, whether it's an opossum or a raccoon on the porch. And oftentimes they're leaving food out for their cats or other animals. Of course, wildlife are going to come into the area, and they might become a nuisance, and they might become habituated. And when provoked, they may bite. And so it's best to avoid those sorts of confrontations and just let wildlife be, and don't try to encourage them to come near you. Try to avoid those altercations.
The suspicion was that it was raccoons that got into that bag of potato chips on the picnic table. But I believe it was rabbits, just making it look like raccoons.
It could be. It's possible. Although more likely raccoons. One thing that we see in raccoons, particularly in the springtime, we do get a lot of calls about this, is canine distemper virus. So often we'll get calls about raccoons that are weeping from their eyes. They have discharge, very debilitated, often lethargic. These raccoons succumb to an infection called canine distemper, which is quite common. It's not a disease that's transmissible to humans, but the signs can resemble rabies, which is why people are very concerned about it. It typically affects juvenile raccoons in the springtime and typically runs its course, so we do see this mortality. There's no treatment for it, but you can vaccinate your dogs for it. So dogs are susceptible to it. Most dogs would be vaccinated for the virus. So if we do see raccoons, it's typically not rabies. It typically is canine distemper, but we still advise people to avoid touching them and coming up to them. Because their behavior is altered by this particular infection, they can be approachable. They can seem quite friendly. And that's just the disease running its course. They're not actually as friendly as they look.
One thing I come across every now and then is a wasp's nest that I don't really want where the wasp has built his nest. I want the wasp to build a nest, just not in my patio. So I was told once upon a time by an entomologist, if you want to get rid of a wasp nest or hornet's nest, insects are cold-blooded. So do it when it's cool, and there's less likely a chance of you getting attacked. Have you heard such a thing, or is that true?
I have not heard that.
Would it stand to reason?
It sounds reasonable.
Other things you can do to avoid diseases in the wild. Let's say you're drinking creek water. Good or bad?
Generally bad. A lot of our creeks are contaminated with what we call fecal coliform bacteria, which are bacteria found in fecal excrements. A lot of that is from agricultural runoff, so livestock production. And a lot of studies have shown very high levels of these bacteria in waters. And so I would definitely use a filter if you're going backcountry camping or backpacking. Make sure you filter the water. I wouldn't drink water from a stream because of this potential contamination.
I've heard in Kentucky, don't eat the wild strawberries. Just because a bird can eat it and do well doesn't mean that we can ingest it. True?
Yeah, well, I know, just from my experience working in veterinary practice, there's certain plants that are toxic to certain species. And so they may be toxic to humans and not toxic to dogs, or toxic to dogs and not toxic to cats. So there's a lot. You have to really look at every particular. If you're not familiar with the plant, best look it up.
I remember back in the 5th grade, my buddy Kevin Hill and I, he had a farm and he had a hayfield. For whatever reason, we got traipsing through this hayfield, and I came home just an itching mess. I can't remember all the home remedies my mother tried to get my itching to go down, but eventually did. But I guess that happens to a lot of people. They're outside having a good time. Next thing you know, they've got a rash. Is it poison ivy, or is this more common than you think?
It seems like there's a portion of the population that does react to poison ivy and these types of plants, and then there's a portion of the population that has no sensitivity to it. I'm one of those people, so I generally am not very cognizant of that. When I'm out hiking, I seem to ignore it, and I've made out pretty well. But others might want to look up, see what those plants look like, and try to avoid them.
Mosquito bites. Can they give us... We know Zika, but generally speaking in Kentucky, if you get a mosquito bite, my wife got like 5 the other day. Any danger in that we should be aware of?
Yes, so there are viruses, particularly, that are spread by mosquitoes, including, as you mentioned, Zika virus, but there are others, as well as West Nile virus. If you recall, in the late 90s, was first detected in New York and has since spread across the United States. It's present across the country, and
is
that
it still out there? Because it's not in the news like it once was.
It's not, but it's definitely still out there. Most human cases are asymptomatic, just as with Zika virus. Most people don't even know they're infected. They may experience mild flu symptoms, and a very small portion of the population has complications associated with it, where they have encephalitis or brain infection, but that is extremely rare. And so it's possible you may have contracted West Nile virus without knowing it, but because of these complications, it's important to take precautions against mosquitoes, wearing mosquito repellent, long sleeves, long shirts, making sure that you're also removing any standing water around your house.
DEET is a good thing, right?
It is. So any repellent approved by the Environmental Protection Agency, and there's a long list. That includes DEET. There's also a lot of natural products like citronella that are quite safe and seem to be quite effective as well.
One of the biggest mosquito-borne diseases that I remember is malaria. Is that limited to, say, the Congo or Africa? Do we have that here?
No, but it is found in certain... So in Hawaii, for instance, so more tropical, so as you mentioned, more tropical regions. But in Hawaii, it's actually quite prevalent and is actually causing significant die-offs of wild birds, certain species of ducks. The problem is a lot of those, especially island ecosystem species, haven't been exposed to these pathogens in the past. So you introduce a new pathogen, and it wipes out the population. And so they've had some local extirpation of species linked to malaria. So it's not something we worry about here in Kentucky, but it is a concern in other parts of the world.
Okay, doctor, let's talk a minute about snake bites. Just because you're bitten by a snake, does that mean anything at all? It
does, particularly reptiles, lizards, and snakes. They have a lot of bacteria in their saliva. It's not deadly, you don't need to rush to the hospital, but you do need to seek medical attention in some cases because it can become infected. Reptile bites have more likelihood to become infected than other bites. So in most cases, you can watch to make sure that there's no infection and swelling. So watch for things like redness, swelling, and heat from that spot. If there's any signs of infection, go see a doctor.
If you had Bactine or first aid cream of whatever description or iodine, is that kind of what you need maybe to keep with you in a first aid kit when you're outdoors and any of these happen?
Yes, that would be my recommendation as well. So any of these disinfectants, hydrogen peroxide, iodine, alcohol, great to keep with you when you're out in the field, and that'll prevent infections.
Talking about mosquito bites a minute ago, I should have asked, what do you do after you're bitten? And I heard this old wives' tale, paint the bite with fingernail polish. What would that do? I
heard that for chigger bites, but apparently it's a myth. So before I moved to Kentucky, I was not familiar with chiggers, and oh my gosh, they are terrible. They just itch for weeks. And so, yes, there's some old wives' tales out there about putting nail polish on and how it's supposed to plug up the chigger and kill it, but that doesn't work, unfortunately. So you have to, maybe use some anti-inflammatories, hydrocortisone cream works fairly well, but no, the nail polish is just an old wives' tale.
I remember my grandmother, don't pick up that frog, you'll get a wart. Can frogs and toads give you warts? No, that is an old wives' tale as well. It's not true. Some of them do secrete toxins in their skin that can cause some irritation. So certain toads, they'll release toxins, and that can be irritating to your skin, but it shouldn't cause warts. If you kiss a frog, will it turn into a prince? I wish, but no. It's Wildlife veterinarian Dr. Iga Stasiak is here with me, and she will stay for the next half hour. Plus, our fishing report, too, is standing by. Don't go away. My name is Charlie Baglan. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. This is Kentucky Afield Radio. Next time you are playing on Facebook, do this. Put Kentucky Afield Radio in your search box, find us, and like us. Every now and then you'll get stuff from us on upcoming guests. You can give us show topic ideas, anything else. We are there. Find us. Time now for our fishing report.
This is Jeff Crosby with the Central Fishing Report. Fishing across the district is fair, dealing with the winter weather in the region. Water temperatures are running around the 40-degree mark at many of our lakes and streams. The two species of interest this time of year are sauger and trout. Sauger are beginning to stage below many of our locks and dams on the Ohio and Kentucky rivers. Try live minnows or a variety of jigs, spoons, or minnow imitating lures. Remember always to observe all boating regulations when fishing below these locks and dams due to possible dangerous water conditions. Trout can be caught at many of our area lakes that are part of the Fishing in Neighborhoods program or FINS program. Check out the department's website at fw.ky.gov for a complete list of FINS lakes in your area. So grab a pole and enjoy some great winter fishing, and always wear your life jacket.
Well, fishing down in western Kentucky at the big lakes, Kentucky and Barkley Lakes, we're in that winter pattern where if you have some nice winter days, which we've had, crappie fishing has been excellent. The fishery is circling around a couple of really good year classes, and a lot of those fish have reached the 10, 11, a few even 12-inch mark, and so fishing has been phenomenal for crappie. Talked to a guy the other day, he said it didn't matter what color jig you dropped in front of them, they were biting. Bass fishing, on the other hand, has been pretty slow on the lakes. They're out there a little bit deeper. Lure to use right now is, the Alabama rig. A lot of people like to use that, and, slow rolling on the bottom creature baits. Fishing below the dams has been kind of slow. They are discharging a lot of water. Well, this is Paul Reister, and I hope you find a good day to go fishing.
This is Jeremy Shiflett with a fishing update from the Northwest District. We've had a great deal of rain over the past week, and the rivers and reservoirs are rising and muddy. Both rough and no-lin are difficult to fish this time of year with dramatic fluctuations in water level. Smaller state-owned lakes will provide the best opportunities for success right now. Crappie have been biting on Peabody WMA, and trout were stocked this week in 3 lakes on the WMA in Muhlenberg and Ohio County. Trout were also stocked at Bevel Park and Litchfield. Use live bait such as night crawlers, red worms, or mealworms for trout in stained water. White or chartreuse-colored tube jigs will work well for crappie. Poor weather and water conditions offer the opportunity for some spring cleaning of boats and tackle boxes. Take advantage of these days, prepare for the good ones to come. Remember to be aware of changing water and weather conditions, and always wear your life jacket while on the water.
Boys were in trouble. About 10 seconds later, he said boys were going down.
A true story.
And it sunk right out from under us.
20 degrees.
Within seconds, one boating trip went
straight down.
The water was bone-chilling.
Once you hit that water, it's so cold you can't move.
The human body wasn't designed for this.
It took my breath away as soon as I hit it, and my hands were so cold in a matter of seconds that I couldn't pop the clip on my waders to get them off.
Conditions were so bad it's amazing that anybody survived.
Perfect for duck hunting, but not for a swim in the middle of a river.
Going overboard is never the thought.
You have to think ahead.
Fun can turn frantic in seconds.
There's no time to react when your world just sinks out from under you.
3 hunters, 2 survivors, 1 reason.
Your life jacket's got your back.
Make sure your first mate isn't your last.
I really don't think that I could have made it without a life jacket.
Your Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you, your life jacket's got your back, and the backing of sportsmen on winter water everywhere. We are back into our second half hour on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. I'm glad you're here. She's one of the good guys in wildlife. Can I say that? Dr. Iga Stasiak, the state wildlife veterinarian. You had sent me an email a couple of weeks ago, Doctor, about an illness affecting all things salamander. Now, it's kind of hard to make salamanders exciting, little squirmy little things. They make most people jump when they see them. But they're not to just be written off, especially when you hear what they eat that makes this world a whole lot more livable place for you and me. And, Doctor, if I were a salamander and I saw you walking down the trail, I would gather all my little salamander buddies and we would stand and salute you. Can you see that?
No, they would run away.
Oh, no,
you
are on the side of salamanders.
I'm on the side of salamanders, but I'm used to animals running away from me. So we're having worked in a zoo setting and here at the Salado Wildlife Center. Usually when they see the veterinarian, they know, some treatment is coming or they're going to get, swab down their throat and things like that. So
the salamanders, they don't know this, though. They are your friend. There's a disease out there affecting salamanders. You'll have to tell me where it is now, and I think that's Europe, but what is it that we're got our eye to the future hoping doesn't happen here?
Sure. So there is a new emerging disease affecting salamanders, and it's called the salamander chytrid fungus.
Chytrid fungus.
Chytrid fungus. So some of the listeners may be familiar with chytrid fungus. So several decades ago, there was another related chytrid fungus that was discovered, and since then it's been shown to have caused mass extinctions of amphibians worldwide. We've lost over 200 species of amphibians as a result of this fungus, mainly in tropical regions, but even so here in North America. Well, there is a new emerging chytrid fungus that was discovered in Europe. It was first reported in 2013, and what they found was extensive die-offs of fire salamanders in the Netherlands. So they had more than 90% mortality. And they identified a new fungus which invades the skin, causing erosions, ulcerations, and eventually kills off the salamanders, believed to have been introduced through the exotic pet trade.
These are like pet trades you could go to any big store or the pet aisle and buy? Absolutely.
So that we actually get hundreds of thousands of amphibians imported from Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. I believe 99% of salamanders imported into the U.S. are actually from Southeast Asia, where this fungus is believed to have originated. And it doesn't seem to affect the species in Southeast Asia, similar to other fungi we know, like white nose syndrome, which is impacting bats, also present in other parts of the world. Unfortunately, our species here in North America are susceptible to it. Thankfully, the fungus is not yet here. But we do have a very active exotic pet trade, and there's a lot of concerns about releasing, if you have pet salamanders, releasing them into the wild or moving animals around, and we're really worried about the salamander coming in because it's been shown to impact some of our common species that we have here in Kentucky.
Couldn't you say the same thing about tropical fish? If you had an aquarium, went to the fish store and bought some lovely fish, colorful, and then eventually turned them loose in the local creek Could that cause maybe the same problems?
It could, yes, and it has in the past. So, invasive pathogens come with these species that are being imported, and they can cause significant die-offs, and the species themselves can become established, like the Asian carp. We've got species that are introduced and establish themselves and then start out-competing our native organisms. So in this case, we're talking about an invasive fungus that could establish itself and affect our salamander populations, which are really important to our native ecosystems and have some important roles that they play.
100,000 pet stores out there would say, oh no, it's not us. Don't blame us. Can you even thwart the pet trade at all?
It's challenging. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in light of this fungus, has issued a moratorium on importation of certain species of salamanders, actually from Southeast Asia, as a result of this. And so they are trying to ban the import of species that are known carriers of the fungus in the hopes of preventing this introduction. And so there's still a lot of legal exotic pet trade that goes on, and there's likely some illegal pet trade as well. I wouldn't, go as far as to blaming the pet trade industry. I think, we're lacking in some precautions that we have for agriculture and livestock, and things like quarantine and testing before bringing animals in. We don't really have that for exotic pets, so they come in, they're not really subject to the same rigorous testing to make sure that they're disease-free before they come into the country. But, certainly salamanders, here in Kentucky, we've got 35 species of salamanders. The Appalachian region has the greatest salamander diversity in the world.
It's not something you can walk out your back door and see readily, but they're there. Where will you find a salamander?
Well, salamanders are found in all kinds of habitats, and that's why we have so many species here in Kentucky. So we've got, I believe, 10 terrestrial species and 20 that have aquatic larvae. So they're both terrestrial and aquatic. They're found in all kinds of wetlands, ponds, marshes, lakes, even in some streams.
Under wet leaves.
Yeah, they like to stay moist. So our terrestrial species often found on the forest floor. They like to hide in moist areas.
Is a salamander a lizard?
Salamanders are amphibians, so they are not reptiles.
Okay.
Lizards typically reserved for reptiles, but salamanders are actually amphibians.
Somebody's going to say, Dr. Stasiak, get a grip.
Yeah.
It's just a salamander. We don't need them. What is the role of a salamander in the world around us?
Sure. Salamanders play a really important role in our ecosystems. They consume vast amounts of insects, so beetles, ants, various crustaceans and arthropods. So they are actually a natural form of pest control for us. So they do provide a service free of charge. So they're predators. They're important predators. They're also prey for other species. Turtles, aquatic turtles, snakes, birds, small mammals also feed on salamanders. So they're an important part of the food web. We talk about greenhouse gas emissions and carbon dioxide. There's decomposers, insects on the forest floor that decompose leaf litter and dirt. So salamanders eat those critters. They eat those insects, and so they slow that process, slow the release of carbon into the atmosphere, and keep all those nutrients down in the soil. There's a plethora of benefits that many of which we don't even understand or haven't discovered yet.
There's not enough money to pay a salamander for what they do for us. If we had to go out and do this ourselves, I guess we couldn't do it.
No, we probably couldn't, and the same has been shown with bats and the recent white nose syndrome fungus, and there's been studies where they've shown that bats benefit us tremendously and save the agricultural industry billions of dollars in natural pest control services. So no, I don't think that they could be replaced.
The fear is that this disease, this chytrid fungus, could, if it isn't already, come to the United States.
So we're actually part of the initiative here in Kentucky, and we're just finishing up our first year of a large amphibian disease study. Part of that is trying to figure out if salamander chytrid is here. So we are sampling salamanders across the state, and this is a nationwide initiative as well. Thankfully, just having finished this first year of the study, we have not yet detected salamander chytrid in Kentucky, and it has not yet been detected in the U.S., so we're hoping that trend continues.
The pet trade Back in 2015, I was reading an article from the United States Geological Survey, and I'm sure you've seen this. Let me read from it. In the pet trade, over 28 million amphibians were reported in the United States over a 6-year period during the last decade, and that importation rate has not declined. So the pet trade is strong. Thus, there's a serious concern that the disease may be introduced in the U.S. in the near future, if it's not already here. This part I've underlined. This is particularly alarming because the eastern U.S. is home, like you said, to the highest diversity of salamanders in the world. So Kentucky's position in all of this, are we more or less affected? Are there states out there more prone to get this or maybe to see it first?
The Appalachian region is probably the most susceptible to the introduction of this fungus and its impacts because we have such a diversity of salamander species, because we have suitable conditions, and we're really close to these ports of entry where these exotic salamanders and other species are coming in as well. There have been studies that have looked at various regions that are susceptible, the West Coast as well, and parts of Mexico. But here in the U.S., the Appalachian region is probably number one as far as our concerns regarding this fungus.
I'm just the type, if I was sitting on a step and saw a salamander on the sidewalk, I'd ask him how he felt. And hope that he feels happy and well, because I want him to be...
Yeah.
I want him to be a happy little salamander and do his work.
Yeah, so. I would hope the same. And we do have concerns, but it's important to realize that we do have healthy, robust populations of amphibians here in Kentucky right now, and we're hoping that they stay that way. So, we're seeing these declines across parts of the U.S. and globally, and we're just hoping that we can mitigate some of these impacts and protect our salamanders our amphibian species.
We're talking specifically about salamanders, but they are an amphibian. Would this affect frogs?
No, not the same fungus. So the salamander chytrid fungus only affects salamanders. There's a related fungus called BD, or Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis.
Do it again. BD stands for?
Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis.
Do it again.
Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis.
That's amazing. I saw that word doing my research. Had no clue how to pronounce it.
Yeah, it's challenging.
BD.
So BD for short. So BD fungus is the one that has caused global amphibian declines, and that is the one that affects frogs and toads. So the other fungus, the BD chytrid, has been very, very detrimental, and that is part of our initiative here in Kentucky. We've, like I said, finished our first year of a study, and we're also trying to understand the distribution of this BD chytrid here in Kentucky to see if it has any impacts on our populations. It is widespread globally. We don't know if there's certain wetlands that carry it, where amphibians carry it and others where they don't, and whether or not it is responsible for any die-offs here locally. So we're trying to get at that information, and we're looking at trying to correlate that with the habitat characteristics and the quality of the habitats to try to see if certain types of habitats are more likely to harbor this fungus.
The work of Kentucky's wildlife veterinarian is our topic this hour. Still to come, an update on the hunt, not for deer, but for a serious disease affecting deer. Plus, tick-tock. What is the time frame to avoid infection from a tick bite? We'll have the answer in our final few. Stay with us. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We're back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. We're in our final few minutes with Doc Stasiak, wildlife veterinarian. The count, according to several scientific sources, and I'm grabbing these numbers from the BBC, this is worldwide, the natural world contains about 8.7 million species. I didn't see it described as such, but my bet is the vast majority of this 8.7 million is insects. More are found every day, but the vast majority have not been identified. And cataloging all of these so that we know what they look like and have a description of these creatures would take more than 1,000 years. And with the way that we're blistering the earth with our towns and factories and roads and everything else, many will go extinct before we ever get a chance to get them named. Of that 8,700,000, nearly 900 are ticks. The ticks are well-known blood-sucking little bugs. They pester humans. They bite livestock, pets. They are also vectors of a wide variety of diseases that can infect animals and they're listed second only to mosquito bites in terms of public health importance. Tick bites. Doctor, what does that mean for us here in Kentucky, for people who love the outdoors?
Generally, it's not good because certain ticks do carry disease. And so here in Kentucky, we have ticks that carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever. We have ticks that carry Lyme disease, which is an emerging disease. So traditionally in Kentucky, we haven't had too many of the black-legged ticks that carry Lyme disease. In recent years, we've had more, and we've seen more cases of Lyme disease as well. And so, yes, you should definitely be aware and check yourself for ticks. The good news is most of the ticks do need to stay on for at least 24 hours to transmit infection. So if you check yourself after you come home and take the ticks off, it should not be an issue.
How do you take the tick off?
Tweezers are pretty good. I usually just use my fingernails. So you want to grab it right at the base, so just around the head, the mouth parts, and then just pull it out. It's not extremely complicated. You don't want to leave the head in there to prevent infection, but usually if you grasp them right near your skin, you should be able to pull them out.
I saw a map plotting where tick-borne diseases were occurring. If you look up in the Northeast in New England, around Lyme, Connecticut, where the disease took its name, you'll find a lot of, say, green dots. And if you look at Kentucky, you'll find more Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. In this one map, I only saw just a few dots. But, buddy, you just go right down into Tennessee, and it is loaded. Have you seen that map?
I have seen the map. We still haven't had very many cases of Lyme disease in Kentucky. And most of the surveillance has been based on human submissions to the public health department. So, someone finds a tick on themselves, they'll send it in for testing. So what we've done is we're doing surveys. This past year, we started surveying wildlife, so including deer, elk, bear, various species for ticks across the state, because these ticks, they feed on humans and they also feed on animals as well. That's actually helped us with our understanding of the distribution of these tick vectors across the state. So I think we'll be able to fill that map in within the next few years as we, move forward and do our surveys, and we'll be able to fill in those gaps. I think there's more of the black-legged ticks than previously believed.
Have you done enough surveys yet to really know how dispersed ticks are in this state?
We've done enough, or we have enough preliminary data to get an idea of the distribution, but not the abundance. So I think, generally wooded areas or where there's long brush, you're more likely to find ticks. So going out there, everyone should take proper precautions and wear mosquito or tick repellent, long sleeves, long pants.
One thing you do is related to the deer population, still checking for chronic wasting disease, sort of a mad cow disease that occurs in deer. Has it been found in Kentucky?
No, thankfully it has not yet been found in Kentucky. However, it has been found in most of our surrounding states, except for Indiana and Tennessee. So it is a disease we're monitoring for very closely, and every year we test over 1,000 deer and elk across the state to try to detect this disease early if it is present. And we're hoping that Kentucky will stay free of this disease, which does cause wasting and loss of condition in deer and elk. And it's a significant concern for us. So we're thankful right now that we haven't found it yet, but we're being very vigilant.
I've always thought that the instant you start talking about it and describe the symptoms, well, if you see a deer behaving this way or at this time of day, then instantly the power of suggestion is going to say, oh, well, I saw that last week. Oh, we must have it, which isn't the case according to scientific testing.
Right.
And I'm hoping that you don't ever find it, but if you do, what then?
Well, we just finished revising our chronic wasting disease response plan, so we do have a plan in place for what we're going to do if we do find CWD here. And that is going to involve a large surveillance zone. We're going to try to see if it's established on the landscape, how widespread it is, and we're going to try to test as many animals as possible from that area to get an idea, and then try to control the spread as best we can. When we get to that stage, we'll be working with hunters to try to take deer out from the area that's infected to try to limit the spread to other deer across the state.
This disease is persistent in the environment. You couldn't just take every infected deer, harvest that deer, and wipe out the disease. It's still here, right?
Right. And that's the scary part about this disease, is because once it's established on the landscape, it's nearly impossible to eradicate or eliminate. So what we're trying to do is prevent its introduction. And we're doing that through regulations. So currently you cannot import high-risk carcass parts from CWD-positive states. So certain tissues such as the brain and spinal cord that are more likely to have infection, we're not allowing those to be imported into the state to try to protect our herd. So there's some preventative measures that we can take.
It sounds like a 40-hour-a-day job.
It definitely.
And all that you do, Doctor, it sounds like there's not enough time to take care of ticks and salamanders and white nose syndrome and bats and problems we could have with deer. How do you get it done?
Well, I think, that's what keeps the job exciting. So the variety is what keeps it interesting and challenging.
You seem optimistic, though, in every case.
I like to be. I think I have to be. I think you have to be optimistic in this line of work and hope that we are going to be able to preserve and conserve our wildlife populations, and that eventually we'll get a handle on some of these diseases, and most importantly that, people, humans and wildlife can coexist, and that future generations can really enjoy the wildlife just as we do, and for many generations to come.
Glad we have you on our side. So thanks for coming by today.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
It's been a good show. We're out of time. This is Charlie Baglan inviting you to join us in a week, and we'll go inside outdoors again here on Kentucky Afield Radio.